And let's use some more of the category object types to create some interesting other elements that we can texture later to make this level a little more interesting. One thing we can do to give our hallway a little more flavor is add an archway as an entry point on either side. But before we do that, let's also raise the hallway floor slightly, maybe give it some steps, to present some height, maybe a little advantage to being within that space. So we'll zoom in to our hallway once more, spacebar to pan around, center up, go to our block tool, and change back from the cylinder where we were working to the block. Now we'll draw our floor, and we'll shrink that down to something we can actually walk over. Now if you remember, 18 units is the maximum your character can walk up. We don't want 32 or we'll have to jump or we'll just run right into it. So let's go down to 16, enter to create that step, and now we'll shift drag in our front view, the selection tool, to make another step. But this time, we'll bring it in on our top, maybe 32 units. You'll see we can give a little bit of a step. So a slight height advantage. Could even do one more if we want. Slight height advantage in the center of our hallway. Now, we also have far more cubes than we need here, so we'll just do some really basic optimization, and we'll take our lower steps, let's drag them in, shift click to replace on the other side, and the same on the floor. Drag this one in, only what we need, shift drag it. Now we have more brushes, but we don't have a bunch of brushes just stacked on top of each other that you're never going to see. Okay. We can also grab our cylinder and drag it up so it now rests on top of our topmost step, or landing. Okay, so now for the arch. It's a good time to save, file save. Now we'll back up in our view, select our block tool, and change from block to arch. Then in our side view, we'll simply draw a box to a similar size that we're going to want in the end. You can always adjust it later. Hit enter or right click and create object. And here we have a preview of the arch properties that we can assign. So wall width can stick with 8. You can also make it a little thicker if you'd like. Perhaps since we're at 16 grid size, we'll just up that to 16. Number of sides, you can do anything you'd like to make it as round as you want. I kind of want something a little angular, so let's just leave that at 8. And we want an arc, 180 degrees, so we'll get just that one span of the arc. If you were to do 360, you'd actually get the full circle with 8 sides, as we've indicated. But let's go back to 180. Now we have our 8 sides in an arch. The start angle basically is going to adjust where our arch starts along this preview. So you can type 90 degrees and see how it rotates around. The add height is actually going to add some height or some depth on each span or each side of our arch. You can think of it as a spiral staircase coming up towards us here in the view. But let's leave that to 0 because we just want a straight arch. Hit OK. And now you see we've placed our arch, but rather awkwardly in our world. We're going to want to rotate it a few times, but we're going to want to do it exactly. So let's go back to our tools, transform, and we're going to rotate a couple times. Looks like we're going to need to rotate 90 degrees along our x-axis and 90 degrees on our z-axis. Now we have our arch. Use your selection tool. You can place the arch where we'd like it. Scale it to fit. Maybe zoom in to help us out. You can shrink it down slightly. In our front view, leave it at the top of the archway. Oops. Make it fit the entire span, and we'll go right down to that first step, which is where it's sitting. Okay. Now, we need to fill in these holes. To do that, we're going to use our vertex manipulation tool. So if you click on it down here, the last thing in the tools tool panel, you get all these yellow dots all over the place. Quite confusing. If you click the vertex manipulation one more time, two more times, we'll only get the edge points we're looking for, the white boxes. Now, what we can do is in our front view, drag these boxes to fill the space. And we want to do it in the most efficient manner we can to limit the number of triangles that the game engine is going to have to render when we play the game. So what we can do is grab this point and drag it up to the corner of our hallway. You can see what it's doing in the 3D view, but it's still going to be a little easier to work in our front view. Let's drag this other point and drag it right in the same spot to create a single triangle filling the space. Then we'll take our point down here, and we'll move it along the wall, maybe raise it a couple units, and the same for the point on the far side, which you can see aligning in the 3D view. Now we have this side basically all squared up. So let's do the same to the other side. At this point at the top, drag the side up just a couple units. And it doesn't actually complete until we change tools. So we'll have to change any other tool. Let's go to the selection tool. And you see now we have a solid object in the fewest number of pieces possible, filling that space. And now we have it finished. We can either drag it across to fill if we want the entire archway, or we could duplicate it and put another arch on the other side. It's up to you. I kind of want to do another arch on the other side, so it makes a couple other places you can hide in this. Zoom out a little bit, get a better feel for our room. Now we're just going to add a couple more elements in here using some of the other tools, and then we'll continue on. Save our scene. And let's start by switching our camera view from textured to shaded textured. Make it a little easier to see what we're going to add. And then we'll focus on the clipping tool and the carve tool. So before we get going with the clipping tool, let's go to our block and create an object which we can clip. So under primitives, object, let's choose a spike. And we'll zoom in our right side over here. And right as you're walking down the steps, let's just create a nice, good-sized spike, maybe 96 by 96. We'll center that up in our view, put it on the floor, but we don't really want it all the way to the ceiling, so let's drag that down maybe somewhere around 128. Enter, make that solid. And if you look in our 3D view, we have a decent spike just sitting right at the base of our steps there, but it's a little ominous, pointy edge, so let's actually just clip the top right off, make it a bit more interesting and less frightening shape. So we'll go down to our clipping tool, and in our side view, we're just going to whack the top right off. So let's just click and drag a line right across, let go, and take a look at what's going on. We have a white top and a red base. And we can come in here with our mouse cursor and we can actually move what that clip is where the clip is going to cut. So for now we just want to keep that straight across. And if you click the clipping tool again, you'll notice it switches. The white and red flip. So now we have a white base and a red top. And if we click again, it's white on both sides, but we still have a line right down the middle. What the clipping tool does is it's going to cut an object or a brush right down the line that we draw. And the white objects are going to remain in our scene once we press the Enter key. So in this case, we would cut the object. We would actually still be able to manipulate both. Click again. We just have the top. The bottom would go away. Once more. The top's going to go away, and we're going to be left with the bottom. That sounds about right for now, so let's keep the white base, with our line straight across, and hit Enter on the keyboard. Now we have this kind of interesting turret-looking shape right at the base of our steps. So now let's make our turret a little more interesting and maybe a little more useful within the game. With our new brush selected, We're going to duplicate, hold shift and drag it up, set it right on top of our existing one. Let's go to Tools, Transform. We're going to rotate it so the top rotates right around and sits on the top of the existing one, and we get kind of an hourglass shape. So we can tell here that we're going to want to rotate around the y-axis 180 degrees. Hit OK. Now we have our little hourglass. It's kind of a cool looking shape. But let's use the Carve tool to make it even possibly a little more useful. Go back to our Block tool, switch from Spike to Block. We'll lower our grid size to about 8. Let's draw a box intersecting completely our shape. Bring the height down to about 16 units. That's 16 wide. And drag it down about 1 unit below where our shapes meet. And now, enter to create our shape. What we actually want to do is create a hole, carve this new block shape out of our existing cutoff spike to create a hole straight through the middle of it, a little tunnel. So select the block with the selection tool and that base spike. And we're going to go to Tools, Carve, or you can click the Carve tool on the toolbar. Carve. And you'll see it doesn't actually remove the shape from our level. So with the selection tool, we'll delete the shape we used to carve. Now, if you zoom in 3D view, you'll see we have this hole right through our existing shape, which if you're sitting down here, might be a good place to get a couple pop shots. Now, go back to the selection tool and click on the object we've carved. And notice how it's carved it into several new pieces. Carving can get quite complex, and for that reason should be used fairly sparingly. It is also a good idea to use the vertex manipulation tool to simplify edges on certain objects you've carved. This shape's been cut into relatively simple pieces, so I think we're okay to leave it for now. But if you plan on carving anything more complex, it is a good idea to create a new, smaller shape which you can carve out of. If we wanted, for example, to carve, say, a hole in our floor, it would be a much better idea to create a new, smaller section of floor which we could carve out of, instead of carving in the middle of our floor and splitting the floor into a large number of complicated shapes. You could also use the manipulation tools to simplify the final shapes. But now that we've got our turret with shooting hole, let's copy both objects and group them together so we can easily move them around and duplicate both as a set. Go to Tools, Group, Control G, or we could group on our toolbar. And now, when you select the object, it's going to select both together, treating it as one object or one brush. Now, we can change our selection mode by selecting Objects or Solids or back to Groups. We can also temporarily ignore the grouping by clicking the IG above. And now, just for the moment, we can select individual shapes within our group. Okay, zoom back out. Let's place a couple more of these turrets around to make things a little more interesting. Selection tool, select our object, our brush, shift drag, try to keep it lined up. Let's place 3 of these guys in each room in a more or less symmetrical fashion. Might be a little interesting to rotate these guys slightly so our shooting holes are aimed a little more towards the door. We can either click again with our selection tool and rotate manually, or if we want to be a little more precise, go back to Tools, Transform, and we want to rotate around our Z-axis. Remember, it's that line looking straight down the top view to rotate in this manner. So let's just do something even, around 25 degrees. Hit OK. It aims perhaps a little too much at this turret here. So let's undo. Tools, transform, Control M, and rotate on the z-axis perhaps 15 degrees. We get a good shooting lane right down the hall. So we'll do the same for our other turret. But this time, we want to transform, rotate, negative 15 degrees on the z-axis. Excellent. So just to be fair, for the team on the left side, we will grab all three, Control, zoom in, Shift drag to duplicate, with Tools, transform, going to rotate 180 degrees along that z-axis, and we'll drag it carefully, keep it in line, into our other room. Looks like we're about 4 units on the grid. Boink. Plunk it back down there. Our grid out. Line it up. Alright. Now we've got our turrets aiming at our door or our hallway on either side. Alright, so those are basically your tools for creating brushes inside Hammer. With these tools, you can basically create any shape you like. It's actually pretty astounding what you can create. Alright, now we're ready to texture. So let's save our work. Let's apply some textures.